Okay, I think you can hear me now. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. The project I'm going to be talking about is funded by Historic England, and you may have caught some of the projects that Historic England fund when Matt spoke yesterday. So my project area is across the North Sea, in the north of England, and it's close to the Humber Estuary, which is home to lots of seaports, a busy area, the big city of Hull. But my actual project area is very rural and has a very small population and a predominantly agricultural economy. So this is the topography of my project area. We've got the Humber Estuary, massive, great big estuary running through here, and this minor river, the River Ancholme, and its floodplain. And then on this side of the river, you've got a gentle slope up to the valley edge, and then a steeper slope up onto the chalk wold. And the wolds are very smooth, very gentle landscape, thin soils in size with these big dry valleys. So the area that I'm going to be looking at today really focuses on this valley edge and what we call the escarpment, the wold escarpment here, and in the villages alongside. So this is a view from above, looking at one of those villages, Saxby. Looking south, this is the escarpment, not quite as dramatic as it might sound, fairly gentle slope, but still steep enough for vehicles to struggle to get straight up there. And we can see here that we've got a mixture of pasture and woodland running down here. And then on the wolds, we've got very big, large, open arable fields with some shelter belt trees. We've got the valley edge here, and this then merges into the floodplain with these long, straight field boundaries. If we were to look back to the 1940s, you'd actually see that most of this area along here was still onto earthworks at the time. And this is a kind of an overview of the earthworks that survived in 1946 and 1947. And that's derived from the vertical air photographs that we have of this area. And you can see that almost all of that stretch of land between the valley edge and up the escarpment had earthworks of some form at that time. Now, most of those earthworks were either ridge and furrow or field boundaries or similar, but some of them were settlement earthworks as well around those villages. And if we look to more recent imagery, this is mainly taken from the LiDAR imagery, we can see that that coverage of earthworks has really significantly reduced. We have much fewer areas that still hold earthworks, and most of those are on the upper slopes of the escarpment. And the real reason, I'll just go back, the real reason for that change between in the second half of the 20th century was that push for agriculture. So after the Second World War, Britain had a big push to make itself self-sufficient in food. And again, in the 1970s, when we joined the European community, there was another push towards arable cultivation. So that was really the precipitation for the removal of all those earthworks, as fields were converted from pasture to arable. So hopefully that set the scene slightly. I'm going to have a quick whip through the various types of features that we see in a kind of a period-based way. So this is a distribution of possible Neolithic and Bronze Age monuments across that wider landscape. We can see there's a couple of kind of key concentrations. We have the ones here that are around the dry valleys on the chalk wold, along this higher ground on the wold here, but then we also have a few examples round the edges of the river, of the floodplain. And it's worth noting that a Bronze Age boat was found here at this pinch point, which shows that this was really a link between the Humber Estuary and the hinterland. So this is kind of typical of the photography that we're dealing with in this area. We've got very small fields with hedges around, areas of woodland, and a very complex cropmark pattern in there. So we have the ring ditch here. We can see one in this photograph, but actually other photographs show about 2 or 3 in the same field. The possible Iron Age or Roman settlement up here. We've got these long ditches running through here, and then this crisscross pattern of drainage here as well. But if we look back to 1947 to see how this field appeared at the time, we can see something quite different. We've got ridge and furrow, that medieval ploughing, surviving into quite high earthworks in this field here. We've got ridge and furrow here as well, not quite as well defined, but still present, and perhaps it had been levelled in this field here. We also see that those linear features, those ditches, we can see now are actually just post-medieval drainage ditches. They're still open at this time. We don't see that circular feature cut in the ridge and furrow. So I can be reasonably confident that it actually predates the ridge and furrow rather than vice versa. And you might just be able to pick out that herringbone pattern in this area of woodland, which had been cleared at this time. Just moving down the valley slightly, we actually have some examples of Bronze Age burial mounds that survive as earthworks at Ancholme Golf Course. Now, of course, golf courses are really difficult landscapes to interpret. So here we have possibly Iron Age or Roman ditches. We've got traces of possible medieval ridge and furrow in some areas here. And we have these two circular features, which are the Bronze Age round barrows. And also all those associated golf coursey type things, whether they're tees or bunkers or putting greens and the like. So it's a very, very busy landscape and difficult to interpret. And this golf course was established early in the 20th century. So these features escaped that conversion from pasture to arable that had happened elsewhere along the valley edge in the middle of the century. But it doesn't mean that they've completely escaped any kind of damage. So we can see here that there is a terrace built against this particular round barrow here. Now, both of them are scheduled monuments, and that scheduling takes note of that disturbance. But as scheduled monuments, any further works need consent from Historic England, and that usually wouldn't be granted without very good reason. And as I mentioned at the beginning, or I might not have done actually, the LiDAR data was compiled in 2022, but I suspect there might be some earlier data integrated into it because this is 2022 imagery, but this is photography that was taken in 2022. And as we can see, we can barely see this barrow here, but something very significantly has changed at the site of this barrow. We have more teeing greens that have been set up, and also this large sand bunker has been constructed as well. So evidently something quite drastic has happened to this site. And this is the kind of point when the data that I'm producing would feed into the Heritage at Risk programme that Matt was talking about yesterday. So that will be notified up the chain of information. There you go. So moving on quickly, this is a distribution map of potential Iron Age and Roman sites. There hasn't actually been that much excavation in this area, so it's all quite hypothetical. We've got the red dots indicate possible cropmark sites. The blue dots are excavation areas that have produced Iron Age or Roman material. And then we've got these paler blue circles, which are areas where significant artefact scatters have come up. Now, there are massive biases in this data, which are too much to go into, but it does seem to suggest that this valley edge is actually used, has a lot more activity than the wold, the expansive wold. And one thing that we do know is that there was a high status Roman settlement up here at Hawkstow, because these Roman mosaics were recovered in the late 18th century. Fortunately, not entirely sure where, so it's very difficult to reconcile those with the cropmarks that are visible in that area. So just popping down the valley slightly, this is an extract of the actual mapping that's produced by this project. So this is mapping of all different dates of features. We've got a gun emplacement up here. We've got two multi-ditched enclosures here and here. We've got dew ponds, so, post-medieval dew ponds where animals would have got water from. We've got ridge and furrow and other linear features as well. So here are the photographs of those two rectilinear enclosures, one there and one there. And to all intents and purposes, taken on face value, these would be the kind of enclosures I'd expect to see on Iron Age or Roman settlement site in this area. But if we look at the vertical photographs from 1947, we see something quite odd. This is the area of the first rectilinear enclosure, and you can see that it's covered with ridge and furrow, medieval ridge and furrow. So this area was ploughed in that period. And there's not even a hint that it's going over earthworks. So I suspect it had been well and truly levelled before we got to the point of ploughing in the medieval period. And we can see features that overlie the medieval ridge and furrow. So we have one of these dew ponds here and just the edge of the gun emplacement up there. But if we look at the location of the other rectilinear enclosure, we can see that this doesn't have ridge and furrow over it. It's like a little island of unploughed ground with the plough furrows all around. And whilst it's not impossible that this was simply avoided by medieval farmers, it's actually more likely that this is a small moat and possible fish ponds, and these are medieval features instead. As well as the possible settlements that we found in this area, there's also a kind of network that's been pieced together from lots and lots of different photographs of linear features. And in this area, they seem to be running from the edge of the valley up onto the Wold Escarpment. You can see a couple here. I'm just going to zoom in on that area. And again, this is the mapping, all features of all periods showing here, but we can see these linear features, big gaps in between them because we've got villages in the way, we've got woodland, and we've got later earthworks, but they do tend to give a hint of something that continues up and over. I'll just highlight those so you can see where my projections are. So if we just look at this example here, again, this is the kind of crop marks that we're dealing with. We can see the linear feature running through here, but there's a lot more going on in the area. It's very confusing, very difficult to distinguish and pull apart features of different periods. And again, if I look back into the 1946 photographs, oh, sorry, that's the mapping. So it's obviously that's put together from lots of different photographs again. And this is what it looks like in 1946, 1947. So the linear feature runs slightly more sinuously through here, but as you can see, it's all covered in ridge and furrow. So we've got medieval or post-medieval ridge and furrow overlying that potential Iron Age or Roman linear feature. And then at some point, there's been this massive reorganisation of the landscape where all these very rectangular fields have been laid out with hedges. And then this particular field boundary coincidentally runs along the same line of that linear feature. But it serves to show how we have to be really careful with our rectifications to make sure they're as accurate as possible so that we can distinguish the features that are visible as crop marks now from those that are on our earlier photographs. Interestingly, even though that feature to me has the appearance of a trackway, where they have excavated, and this is only by trial trenching, similar features have been excavated here and here. And in each 3 occasions by 3 different excavators, they all decided that these were boundaries rather than trackways. Mainly because the ditches were so large, it was deemed unnecessarily big for just a trackway that was just to control animals or to separate crops from fields or so forth. So if we extrapolate from that, it's possible to see that the landscape is being divided up by these potential boundaries into kind of equitable areas of land parcels. So a little bit of the valley, the floodplain, a little bit of the valley edge and the escarpment, and then a chunk of the wold up the top there. And that can be seen across the whole of the escarpment. So moving on, all of the villages that are labelled here will have their origins in the 11th century, but I'm just going to have a quick look at this one down at the south here. This is Ancholme. This is a 1946 or 1947 photograph. The village here, we've got a large quarry, and this is the edge of an airfield. But you can see that this area of land here, unlike neighbouring land and elsewhere along the valley edge, hasn't actually been divided up in the post-medieval period at the point of enclosure. We also see a lot of earthworks in this area. So there's a potential enclosure or moat here. I'll just put on the interpretation. And lots of linear features. Quite likely some of these are much later than medieval, but potentially with medieval origins. And there's a small medieval site down here. We'd like to look at the LiDAR data and think this will now, give us some more information about this site. But unfortunately, that site, so this area here, has been completely levelled by ploughing. Completely gone. Maybe a touch of something left there. And here have been a series of fishing lakes have been constructed. So although we might have below ground features here, I suspect almost everything in this area has been lost. So one of the surprising things about this relatively narrow strip of land is how much has been given over to a kind of designed landscape, so parks and gardens and so forth. And I'm just going to have a quick look at an example here of a 17th century garden, which remarkably survives as earthworks. So this is the village of Hawkstow here. We have the church, and these here are the garden remains. So we have a canal and some big earthworks here, and the features continue on the other side of the valley as well. And just for context, we have another high-status site, the Roman villa up here with its mosaics, somewhere, not totally sure where, and we've also got the Bronze Age barrow site here. And you may recall we actually had an Iron Age or Roman settlement here as well, so a really busy landscape. And of course, we can see ridge and furrow still surviving here on the edge of the valley and maybe going up the slopes as well. So this is some LiDAR, which fortunately have at a 1 metre resolution. And we can just have a quick look at the features that we've got on this garden. This area here has been levelled by this time. We've got a canal, which is like a long fish pond, really. They were called canals at the time, and a terraced walkway where someone would have promenaded along and taken the views either to the floodplain or to the house. But the principal features are this huge ramp here, where you can just see in the cross-section, and another big platform here which runs along the edge of the road. And the house stood in this alignment here and was thought to be a range of buildings, and possibly with deep cellars here and here to explain those voids. And of course, then we've got the modern road and then the escarpment running up there. Just focusing on this area here, there's a map that was produced in 1796 by Lund, and he gives quite a good impression of what the gardens looked like at the time, in particular with the positioning of trees and so forth, and labelling of features. Unfortunately, I can't show it here today for copyright reasons. So he identifies this area here and this area here as small gardens, and we can just about begin to see the traces of possible circular feature here and some kind of arrangement here. I'm hoping that if we were to, in the future, be able to access higher resolution LiDAR data, we might be able to bring some more out of that. But I think these are probably kind of covered walkways and flower beds and garden design, because they're just in the correct position for that kind of thing. If the house was here, you'd be looking down onto this feature here, and from the house you could see into these gardens here, and also you have this terraced walk along here as well to look down onto the gardens. On the other side of the road, we have a massive terrace cut into the side of the bottom of the escarpment with a viewing platform here. And just to finish off with here in this field, you can see there's ridge and furrow running that way, as there is up and down the valley. And then these small triangular features, which are little gullies or ditches, which are cutting into the ridge and furrow. And those are small tree enclosures, and these are depicted on Lund's map, so we know exactly what they are. And I think there's about 14 or 15 of them. And I've only seen facsimiles of Lund's map so far, but the trees are depicted in a very particular orientation. And it's possible when you zoom into this data that you can actually see the throw holes for those trees, and they correlate quite closely as the way they are depicted on that map, which is really nice to see. So just to summarise, we've got superimposed landscapes of prehistoric monuments, Iron Age and Roman settlement, medieval settlement and farming, and then that post-medieval enclosure and the parks and the gardens, and even remnants of Second World War defences. And that is all further complicated by 20th century land improvement and then that conversion from pasture to arable in the late 20th century. We're also lucky to have a really wide range of aerial photographs from the 1940s onwards and the LiDAR data. But to bring that all together requires really careful cross-checking through all those images. So you're always verifying against earlier photographs what you're looking at. And that, of course, requires really accurate mapping and depiction of mapping and sort of rectification. But if we can achieve that, it can help us to sort out the relative dates of features. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for reminding us again that it's necessary to combine all of the things to get the dating right as well. Sorry? Have to shout, right? You're sleeping already. Right. Any questions from the floor? Right there.
Thank you. That was really good to see a fellow chalk landscape. I'm on an escarpment a bit further south of you in the Chilterns, and we have our strip parishes that date. Yes, and we don't have evidence for that earlier division because basically what you're describing with that late Iron Age or Roman boundary is
Possibly.
strip parish.
Yeah,
possibly. Do you see that replicated in your 11th century settlements? Because they look very spaced out. Is that carrying on?
I didn't add the parish boundaries on here because I thought it'd just complicate, but you have exactly the same kind of pattern. On one or two of them do roughly coincide. The parish boundaries are a lot straighter and they're a lot, easier to follow. So that particular circuitous one, which has been dated the Iron Age, does go either side of one of those parish boundaries. Some of the others, there's no kind of connection, but it's a very similar process, dividing the land up into those equitable strips. So yes, I think there must be a link there.
I need to dig some of my parish boundaries.
Yeah. Yes.
Another question? Nudging it? Then we'll move on. Thank you.